Initial Thoughts is a spoiler-free movie review series. All opinions are my own. Hi everyone, welcome back to Initial Thoughts, a series in which we talk about films as and when they are released. Today's film we're talking about is a big one. Oppenheimer, which is directed by Christopher Nolan and stars Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon and others. So when 2023 began and I had a look to see what was coming out this year, what was being released, I had a few in mind that could have the potential to be movie of the year. One that was certainly on that list was today's film we're talking about, which is Oppenheimer. I firmly believe that Oppenheimer had the potential to be my favourite movie this year. It had the potential to be something truly special, which you could apply to so many of Christopher Nolan's films. And that's where the excitement began, in truth. When I first heard, I think it was like early 2022, maybe even further back than that, whenever this got announced, that it was going to be Christopher Nolan's next epic film. And then you've seen the cast. Cillian Murphy, Emily Blunt, Matt Damon, Florence Pugh. I mean, the list goes on. This cast is just stacked. So seeing that, and the story and the topic being discussed, being it's such a harrowingly true story, which isn't really something that Christopher Nolan has delved into this degree before, to take on a task like this, based on the story of something that's one of the most important and horrific things that ever happened in human history. It's quite an ask, and it's quite a task, but when you see someone like Christopher Nolan taking this on, I had no doubt in my mind that he would make something truly special of Oppenheimer. And did I feel that way? We'll get there as we get there. But let's just talk about a lot of things that I really, really loved with this film. And I mean, I could be behind the door and I could kind of go, well, I'll leave you in suspense. I could get to about the 10-minute mark and then go, oh yeah, I like this film. I loved Oppenheimer. I thought this movie was a truly special movie. And you know I throw about that term every so often, but this feels more than that. Oppenheimer feels... I mean, I described this when I chatted to friends, when we chatted outside the movie, which was... I learned more in this about history than I did studying it for 5 years in education. And maybe that says more about me as a student in a history class, but that's another matter. But it's the most interesting, the most perfectionly put dialogue in a movie of this type, if you get what I mean. It's one of the finest examples of a movie being paced to the level of... It's paced like an action movie with absolutely no action in it, bar, of course, the bomb. You know, that's certainly a part of it, and that's sort of the element. But the story, in a weird way, is more about everything around it. It's not really about the bomb. It actually becomes, in a weird way, yes, that is the spectacle of the movie. That is the moment that certainly gets you out of your seat, and that's the movie's defining and memorable moment. But truly, where this movie sets itself apart from other stories and tales and movie storytelling is the dialogue. The way these characters, and I don't mean dialogue in the way I talk about someone like Quentin Tarantino, who's a masterful in his dialogue, but that's more to do with chemistry with characters. That's more to do with charisma. In this, it is the serious conversations, the court and the allegations, the negotiations, the arguments. Everything in this feels very real and very... I mean, is it okay to say it? It's just interesting. Now, that kind of brings me on to my biggest point with this. I love this film. I imagine a lot of people will love this film. I imagine the majority of people will adore this film. But what I will say is this movie is a lot of people talking in rooms. This is not a John Wick, where it is action, 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 action. It is not that. There is very little action. A lot of it is, as I say, arguments, conversations, discussions, trying to get to the solving of a problem. And in a way, it's one of the best iterations of that for me. To have characters feel so real, And of course it is a real story. These are real people that really existed and had this real involvement. Now, of course, maybe dramatised to a slight bit, but by all recollections, this is 95% true for the points. And of course, in the end, the actual outcome of what happened is true. So there isn't any punches thrown, but there also isn't any punches pulled by the director or by the actors. And that leads me perfectly on to talking about the performances. And really, where do I start? I mean, let's start with the main man. The man on the poster, Mr. J. Robert Oppenheimer himself, which is Cillian Murphy. Cillian Murphy I have been a fan of for a good long time now. And I'll admit, most people love him for Peaky Blinders. I've watched a bit of that series but haven't even finished it. So it's not like I'm coming in as a fanboy of that show and bringing it to that. But people who have watched that show, I don't think they had any doubt when he was cast as this that he would be able to bring this home because of the performances he gives as Thomas Shelby and even other performances years ago with things like even 28 Days Later. I look back at that movie and I remember thinking, this guy has a lot about him. And, you know, I remember saying this a few years ago when we were talking about one of the bigger performances of the year. If Cillian Murphy does not win Best Actor at the Oscars next year, I look forward to seeing who gives a better performance. And that's as simple as that. Because will his performance be the best? Will he win the Oscar? At this point of talking, now there's a few movies still to come out this year, but it'll be a hard ask to have outperformed what Cillian Murphy brings in this movie. And not only is Cillian Murphy fantastic and brings the harrowingness and the storytelling by saying nothing. And I think I've mentioned that a few times before in a few different movies and serious movies, which he tells so much by his eyes, his facial expressions. There isn't everything, and you heard me mention that about dialogue. Yes, a lot of this movie is some really properly defined dialogue in storytelling and pacing, but what it does do, it has a lot of subtlety. It has a lot of storytelling by not saying much. It's the expressions on people's faces, the harrowing nature of what is going on, and that's conveyed so well to the audience that, I mean, everybody in here is doing a hell of a job. There is not a performance in here that isn't giving an 100%. And other performances like Matt Damon gives his best performance in years. He's so good in this. And being such a key part of this as well. And the way he bounces off Cillian Murphy in the movie, and they have their quarrels and they have your arguments, but also ultimately come to the same goal. That's another performance that's just fantastic. And Matt Damon could be up for Best Supporting Actor. And let's talk about Best Supporting Actor, because 1,000,000,000% Best Supporting Actor will be Robert Downey Jr. Unless something amazing comes out, because Robert Downey Jr., this is his best performance ever. Ever. As simple as that. And for his to be his first film since Endgame, which, by the way, as much as Endgame is not the kind of movie an Academy would really appreciate, and probably rightly so because there was a lot of movies that year, but Tony Stark and his performance in that last movie, Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, gave so much. So I remember thinking after that, I wonder what he goes on to next, RDJ, and for him to come in to this and give a performance of this level, I can't wait to see what Robert Downey Jr. does next. And what a career he's had for this part. And he was, let's be real, he was getting a bit defined by Marvel movies. He was getting defined as Tony Stark and not as the actor. Because something prior to Iron Man was like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which I quite like as a film, don't love, but it didn't do well at the box office, and then Iron Man came around, and then that was really it. You know, and there wasn't really anything that he deferred from the Iron Man and the MCU. But for him now to have spread his wings and to come to a project like this, be directed by Christopher Nolan, and give in this performance as Strel, I will be amazed if he doesn't at least write it close to get Best Supporting Actor, because he is fantastic in this, as is everybody else. Emily Blunt is another one. Emily Blunt, it's one of her best performances. And even with limited dialogue for what she brings 110%. People like Florence Pugh. People like, and this is more of a rogue shout, there was 2 actors in this that I'm not totally familiar with. I've seen them in a few smaller projects that weren't so good. But someone like Jason Clarke in this. And if you've seen the film as his interrogation and his role in it, he is annoyingly brilliant because of his character. He has that kind of Joffrey effect where you have that, okay, he's doing a brilliant job, but I'm hating you right now. And that's what he brings. And he does it brilliantly. Another one's Josh Hartnett, something like that. He was in Black Mirror recently with the Aaron Paul episode, and to be coming into this, he's also another performance I really enjoyed. And this is a stacked cast. This is as stacked a cast as I have seen in a lot of years. Because if you look at the quality in every role, people like Kenneth Branagh are in here, and even more of a limited role. There's so much talent in this movie. From the direction, to the production, to the score. Let's talk about the score. And Christopher Nolan is obviously fantastic with recognisable score. Interstellar, Inception, The Dark Knight. Brilliant scores that always you have in your mind of what they are. Signature tracks from it. And this has at least 1 or 2 more that you will hear and hear again, because they are produced to the highest level. The movie is produced to the highest level, and that's the overall summary of this. We could talk about the details, we could talk about I was going to say the special effects, but there isn't any CGI. This guy, it's all practical, and that just adds to the spectacle even more. For a movie that has so much focus on dialogue and conversations in rooms, that on any other movie you would think, well, I would imagine that would be quite slow and quite... This is paced as fast, and it does not take a break. It does not let you come up for air. It just keeps going and going and going and going and going until you realise you've been sitting there for 3 whole hours, and it flies in. And there's very little films that are 3 hours that you don't notice the runtime. But this is one of them. Once this movie gets going, but there isn't even a lull. You're straight in, you're hooked from the start, and well, I was in my case. I just loved everything about Oppenheimer. And it has me so intrigued to read more about the history of the story, of what happened. American Prometheus, the book that this is based on and adapted from, has me intrigued to go and read that, although I'm not a big reader. But it has something, and again I go back to that word, I just think special. Oppenheimer is a special movie. It is one that I hoped would be good. And I said that at the start. When I started this review, I started talking about how this was one that I had that expectation that could be really good. But I love when a movie exceeds my expectations. And we've had that a few times this year already, but none more so than this. And I already had such a high hope for this, because I went into this, and even with a Christopher Nolan film, I always come in with so much expectation. If you were following my 5 of the Best series, for example, Christopher Nolan has appeared as 1s and 2s for years for the longest time. Movies like Inception, Interstellar, even things like The Prestige, a bit further back, Memento. Lots of films that have so much quality, so much variety, but all have that signature quality that Christopher Nolan brings as a director. He is undoubtedly one of my favourite directors working today. He's definitely top 3 for me in quality, and I think more on guarantee. I go into a Christopher Nolan movie and I have no doubt. The only flicker of doubt is with what happened with Tenet. But Tenet was also marred with the time period, and when it did come out, when the cinemas were kind of shut at that time, it was kind of between a rock and a hard place. And I think maybe on a second rewatch, which I haven't done, I might enjoy it more. But everything else that he has done, all the way back to Following, there is so much with Christopher Nolan that he's just one of the best. One of the best directors about. You can clearly see his influence from directors like Kubrick. I suppose that's maybe the biggest influence to him. I think he said that in interviews, where someone like Kubrick influences him so massively on what he can bring to the screen. And kind of that defining. When you look at Kubrick all those years ago with certain movies that really took cinema up a gear, it bumped it up from, stage 1 to stage 2, if you like. Whereas now, wherever we are in the stages of what cinema can bring, movies like Oppenheimer nearly take it. It's where it breaks into the next echelon of quality. I just love this film. I feel like I could talk for another 30, 40, 50. I could talk for 3 hours. I could talk for the 3 hours movie length about how much I love the movie. But I'm not going to do that. That's me waxing lyrical about it. I want you to go out and see it yourself. But before you do, let's talk about ratings. And IMDb is pretty much sharing my optimism, sharing my appraisal for this movie, because they must have went in similar to me, expecting a brilliant movie like Christopher Nolan usually brings. And the general consensus, we're talking almost a 9 out of 10 there on the first week after 100,000 reviews. Like, that is yeah, this is a I was going to say a good film. This is a excellent film. It's a movie that I would imagine, even if you can acknowledge that it isn't a movie for you, you can acknowledge that history, and I think even someone who isn't fussed on this type of movie would come out of this going, wasn't really for me, but I can't deny the quality of it. I think that's where we're at with Oppenheimer. It's hard to deny this is anything less than a masterpiece of storytelling, of history telling. I couldn't care. I'm not one of these historian guys that loved it at school, or science. History or science were two subjects I couldn't give a toss about. But to come into this and have such a love for what they were able to do, the story they were able to tell, and the reality that they were able to tell, of course, being based on such a true thing that happened. Oh, just amazing. IMDb has gave it almost a 9 there, just dropped slightly under it. What do you think I'm giving this out of 10? You know what I'm giving this out of 10. Because it's a special movie. It's an exceptional movie. Oppenheimer is, without a doubt, in my mind, a 10 out of 10 film. Because it is truly golden, in my mind. And yes, you may you do have these guys that say, well, 10 out of 10s don't really exist. The highest you can give it's like a 9 or a 9.2. The 10 out of 10s for me on this channel are the movies that I will look back and always have a love for. And I have no doubt about that for the ones that I give a 10 out of 10 on this channel. And to be truthful, even the ones that I give 9 or 9.5s are probably not far off that either. Because we are in, and do you know what I don't want to get a tirade about this. Maybe there's another video for another day. But I just want to talk on this briefly. I have heard recently a lot of people saying about how cinema is dying. And it needs revived. It needs movies like Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer and Barbie and things like this to get people back to the cinema. And last year it needed Elvis and it needed Top Gun Maverick to revive the cinema. If you're like me and you're going to the cinema all the time, you can see the quality. Yes, there is a lot of bad movies. There's a lot of movies that don't hit the mark. But let's not forget that the quality of movie making in some certain instances, and each year we are having some really, truly memorably brilliant movies. And Oppenheimer is one of the strongest films that I have seen when it comes for pure quality. Pure movie making quality on the acting, the directing, the cinematography, the score. Oppenheimer is as strong a movie that we have had in the last few years when it comes to all that quality. So I will not hear the slander that cinemas are dying and movies are getting worse, because they're not, in truth. And my hot take is that movies have the potential to get better and better and better. I mentioned it earlier, I'm doing this 5 of the Best series where I'm going through all the months, I'm going through month by month and doing each year from the 2000s up to present day. And what I've found is the closer we get to present day, the more quality movies we're getting. I think, talking about 2023, we are only halfway through this year, just over halfway through this year, and we have already had 5 or 6 truly brilliant movies. And that is, like, and I'm not just talking about good movies, I'm talking about brilliant, top tier, brilliant movies. This movie here is awesome. And, I mean, one of the major reasons for that now is Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is a special movie. I've said that a few times, and I will continue to say it. It is a movie that you cannot deny the quality of it. And I implore each and every one of you, if you get a chance, it is 3 hours, it is a bit of time, but you won't notice it once you're sitting in that seat. Go and see this movie and treat yourself to an experience like none that I can remember at the cinema. This is a brilliant movie. And yeah, that has been my review for Oppenheimer. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out of your day listening to me talking about some movies. If you want to stick around, I would appreciate you so much for it. If you want to hit subscribe, hit the bell, you'll be notified every time a new video goes live. Leave a like, let me know you enjoyed this one. And if you do, I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye, guys. Thanks for taking the time to watch this video. Before you go, here are some of my other videos. For updates and information on upcoming videos, the best place to find us is my Twitter. Much love, everyone.